can record now. That's
Okay.
it. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
I see. Okay, great. Right, yes, I was saying this is must be getting on for about the 20th meeting that the Edinburgh TUC COVID committee has organised since the start of the pandemic. We haven't done one before on housing, obviously a really important topic. So I'm looking forward to this meeting tonight. And thank you. We've got people from Living Rent here, Vicky and Sean. Thank you very much for coming. Ellis from the Rent Justice, the Edinburgh students. Thank you very much. We were to have someone from Positive Action in Housing, Sonny, but I don't see him yet, so hopefully he'll come later. Anyway, I'd like to get Duncan to speak first. Duncan Smith, who's chair of the City of Edinburgh Council Unison, who's speaking in a personal capacity. Then I'd like to ask Vicky and Sean from Living Rent to speak. And I know that Vicky, you have to leave about 7:30, so perhaps we could pause then and take any questions or discussion that's specific to you. Is that okay? Okay, Duncan, so on you go. I think you're going to speak more generally about the housing crisis affecting Edinburgh.
Yeah, thanks, Hilary. Yeah, people who don't know, I work for the council. I work in the homelessness division of the council here, and the things I'm going to talk about today are just about Edinburgh, and they're not particularly about the impact of COVID, because I think we'll get into that in the discussion. What I wanted to do, especially for people who are not aware of housing issues, is talk a bit about homelessness in Edinburgh. What the council does is a public sector provider, and what the demand is for housing and that kind of thing, and what's likely to be the demand in the future. Because Edinburgh's an expanding city, unlike a lot of towns in Scotland. But with that, will go an increase in poverty, inequality, and also homelessness. So I want to start by really putting some figures on it and give you an idea of what the size of homelessness is in Edinburgh. And I'm looking at figures over a number of years, and I'll tell you what year it is when I'm talking about it. Not to be boring, but it's useful to be precise, I think. So over the last 8 years, up to March this year, roughly about 3,700 people each year presented as homeless. That is, they turned up at a council office and said that we're homeless for whatever reason. That's the average. It was 4,000 odd at the start of that period, 2012, up to 2 years ago. That was steadily declining for a whole lot of reasons we can't really go into. But for the past 2 years, it's increased again. And I'm going to talk about last year. That's the year 2019, 2020. So the number of presentations of people declaring that were homeless was 3,490, which is the second annual increase in a row. Of these people, just under half had been asked to leave the accommodation they're in by their parents, a partner, family, or friends. They've got 40%, 46%. There are also another large group. The second large group is number of people who, in effect, have been evicted. And that was 26% of that total had been evicted. And the largest single figure was from private rented accommodation, which was 19%. For council evictions, it was 3%, housing associations 4%. So you can see how the private sector is much more likely to evict you if you get into problems with your rent and so forth. Another large figure was domestic violence, which was 12%. Again, that's fluctuated over the years, but it's still, unfortunately, very steady and quite high. Those are the key categories that people fall into when they turn up and say, look, I've lost my home. What can you do for me? And for people who don't know, the local authorities have a duty to house people who declare themselves as being homeless. They also have a duty to provide housing support if people have a range of needs. Perhaps they've got difficulties with their health, physical or mental. Maybe they have learning difficulties. Maybe they have drug addiction issues. And the council also has a duty to support people to try and address some of those needs they may have. And that's quite significant. For example, about this time last year, about 1,000 people in Edinburgh were getting support through housing support in one form or another. It's quite a substantial proportion of people. What I would say before I go on is the number of people actually sleeping rough that you might see on the street is a relatively small proportion. So I think sometimes people get confused when people talk generally about homelessness. They think about, somebody sleeping in a corner on a piece of cardboard. Those people are around, certainly, but homelessness impacts on a lot more people. Thousands of people, as I mentioned, whereas those people sleeping rough would number in the hundreds, perhaps, and any one night, maybe 100 or something. A real serious problem for people in that situation. But when the Scottish government talks about tackling homelessness, sometimes they mean rough sleeping. But the real issue of homelessness is much deeper, much wider, and impacts on a lot more people. I just thought it's worth saying that. Okay, as I've said, the council has a duty to try and get people accommodation. And they still have about 20,000 council homes. Some years ago, we fought a campaign to stop the council stop being privatized, and we're successful in that. And as I say, there's about 20,000 council houses. Unfortunately, the waiting list is very, very long. So if you find yourself in temporary accommodation after becoming homeless, you could wait for up to a year before you get permanent accommodation. Some people get it much faster, depending on your circumstances or luck, but the average is just about 350 days that you might be waiting in temporary accommodation. And roughly it's about 1,700 people waiting in temporary accommodation at any one time. In addition to that, the council now has a scheme called private sector leasing, where private landlords are encouraged to house people who have accommodation problems. And about 1,400 people are being housed by that means. I might say during the COVID crisis, the council came up with about 200 more places to house people, in hotels and all that kind of thing. We can get onto that later. So what's the demand for public housing? By that, I mean both council and housing association accommodation. There's a register called Edindex in Edinburgh. It's a common register for council and housing association tenancies. At the moment, there are 21,000 people registered for housing. For every house that comes on the market, as it were, to be let, 190 households bid for that single place, that single accommodation. Most of the council accommodation which comes up for let goes to homeless households. In Edinburgh, it's about 77% for the council, and about 48% for housing associations. That's much higher than anywhere else in Scotland as a proportion. The Scottish average for rehousing homeless people is only 43%. I say Edinburgh's council 77%, which is good if you're homeless, but not if you're waiting for a home for other reasons. Obviously, we can come back to the supply later on and what the issues are around that. So looking at demand in the long term, there's something called the Housing Needs and Demand Estimate, and the most recent one says that in the next 10 years in the Edinburgh area, we need about 38,000 to 46,000 new homes. And of those, about 6% need to be in the category of public sector housing or housing association housing. So that's quite a large number. And you know, one of the questions will be, given the recession and the impact of COVID, will these targets ever be met? And that's yet to be seen. So when the council makes its forward planning, it does so in the form of something called the SHIP, which is the Strategic Housing Investment Plan. Every council has to submit one of those to the Scottish Government. And it usually covers a 5-year period. And it's interesting that the last SHIP from Edinburgh, the investment plan, noted that falling income and rising costs are the main drivers of poverty and inequality in the city. It's quite unusual for them to come up and say that up front. And the reason for that is, as you probably know, the price of houses and the price of renting privately in Edinburgh. The document, the SHIP plan, notes that the average house price is about 6 times the average gross annual earnings in Edinburgh. And that is very high relative to other places in the country, apart from places like London in the UK. So looking at some figures from a couple of years ago, if you're renting in the public sector, in the housing association sector, the proportion of your income you'd spend on your rent is roughly 22%, something like that. If you're renting privately in Edinburgh, it's about 55% of your income. These figures from a couple of years ago, so I suspect that the proportion is much higher now. So you can see if you have to rent privately, it's going to cost an awful lot to you, and a lot of your income is going to be swallowed up by paying that landlord. And Edinburgh is particularly significant in the Scottish scene because only about 14% of the housing stock in Edinburgh is either council or housing association. More than a quarter of households in Edinburgh rent from private landlords, and the private sector has doubled since the year 2000. And you might ask, why is it doubled? Well, you know, that's where the money is. It comes down to profit making. As we know, you know, rents on 2-bedroom flats in Edinburgh can easily be, you know, £1,200 a month or more. That's pretty high. And local housing allowance, which is one of the benefits you get to support your rent if you're renting privately, does not cover that. Does not cover that all. Again, which is a significant impact on people's well-being and poverty as well. And one of the trends we've seen in Edinburgh is for long-term private lets to decrease. A recent study showed that about 10% of private rented sector landlords had changed to short-term letting in recent years, which has resulted in a sharp increase in rents in those areas physically or geographically close to the areas where there's a lot of short-term lets.
Sorry, Duncan, can I ask you to wind up shortly?
Oh, right, sorry. Yeah, I could go on for a long time. There's a massive problem in the private rental sector with Airbnbs. Edinburgh is probably the worst in Scotland for that. Okay, the supply, as I said, of housing, there's about 20,000 council homes. The council is committed to delivering about 10,000 social homes, affordable homes over the next 5 years. And it's supposed to be producing about 2,000 of those a year. This is all dependent on Scottish Government grants. And each year, the grant funding has been about £65 million. Now, past 2021, that funding is in doubt. So what I want to end up by saying, I suppose, is that Edinburgh does have, you know, a significant homeless problem, even though it's a very flash capital city and a lot of rich people live here. There's a lot of people on the council waiting list. There's a lot of people who can't get accommodation. The rents privately are tremendously high. Airbnb is one of the drivers of those high rents. The council and other housing associations are building, but not quick enough. And the demand is always going to outstrip supply unless we have a massive building program of public sector housing. For that, I mean, tens of thousands of public sector houses need to be built. And I'll leave it there. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Duncan. Right, we have here from Living Rent, Edinburgh, Sean and Vicky. Are you both going to speak?
Hi, yeah, we're both going to speak.
Okay.
I'm happy to go first.
Okay, on you go.
All right, cool. So thanks, Duncan. That kind of sets up what I'm about to talk about quite nicely. So like Hilary said, I'm from Live and Rent, so I'm a member and active in our member defence team. Live and Rent are Scotland's tenants union, and our team support tenants with like individual cases of disrepair, deposit theft, people who are facing the threat of eviction and harassment from their landlord, as well as other things. So just wanted to talk a wee bit about what we've been doing during the pandemic. We did a survey at the beginning when it all sort of kicked off, and that was like a survey of our members and of other tenants in the private and social sectors, and 48% of respondents said that they expected that coronavirus would affect their ability to pay rent, and that's exactly what we've seen. So what we did at that time is, like, a few of our members were experienced in negotiating rent reductions for cases of disrepair. So got a training program put together, managed to, like, throughout the pandemic, constantly negotiating rent reductions on behalf of members, and secured over £40,000 in non-repayable reductions, which hopefully, you know, has helped to keep people out of arrears and stop them from facing eviction. Now, unfortunately, it's not been enough, with like mass layoffs and landlords sort of refusing to be, landlords in the private sector refusing to negotiate or to offer any sort of any leeway with the rent. We've seen a lot of people being served with notice to leave, and we're like looking forward. We're just seeing more and more eviction cases, so trying to resist them, resisting them in different ways. So pre-tribunal, we've had members out picketing at landlords' properties, at their homes, and also outside letting agents and housing associations. And then during the tribunal, we're kind of facing some challenges with how to support and how to like do action during digital tribunals, because usually we'd be picketing outside, and then if the tribunal goes through, resisting evictions or like on the member's doorstep when the sheriff officer comes. So yeah, I'll pass on to Sean to talk a wee bit about what else we've been doing.
Yeah, so I think something that's really really important is that, you know, these these the things that we've been doing over the pandemic, and these issues that have come up, they've not been created by coronavirus, and it's simply been, as Duncan's detailed, those issues were already there, and the everything that we're talking about was inevitable, given the increasing financialisation of housing in this country. So hopefully a vaccine is just around the corner, but the issues are not going away, just when the virus goes away. So we are going to be continuing that fight. And one of the things that we've done is we've put together, looking forward to the Scottish Parliament elections, we've put together our tenants manifesto, which details in depth the solutions we think that are there to start making a difference and improving the situation for renters in the country. So it talks about fighting the growth of buy-to-let landlords, as we've already discussed, Airbnb and other forms of buy-to-let, bringing vacant land back into use for public housing, strengthening the role of tenants in housing associations, introducing rent controls, which not only act to bring down the cost of renting, but also act to bring up the quality of housing stock in the country. As we've already discussed, there are issues up and down the country, but they are especially acute here in Edinburgh for so many reasons. So, what are we doing? How are we taking those ideas forward? We've got local branches appearing all over Edinburgh. We've got a general members branch, so wherever you are in Edinburgh, you can join and you can get involved. But we've got so many members coming in and joining and finding problems, and have a motivation to get involved and to improve the situation. We've got local branches popping up all over the place. We've got a new branch in Leith. We've got one in Gorgie and Dalry. We've got a new branch starting in Muirhouse. All over the city, these new branches are springing up. What they're doing is they are going to be taking these ideas that we've got in our manifesto to the local candidates for the upcoming election, but also they're not just going to be talking about those things. We want to be a real presence in our communities, because housing it's not just a house; it's a portal to all the other nice things in life. So we are also, our members are out protesting closures of libraries. They are out picking litter in areas that are ignored by private owners of land. They are, like Vicky said, we're out taking direct action to landlords who are going against the rules and trying to illegally evict tenants. Something that might be relevant in this forum is that our members who are members of trade unions are also reaching out to their local branches, and they're going to be talking to their local trade union branches about affiliating and ways that we can work together. So there's big issues, but I think one of the things that's exciting for me is it's not all doom and gloom. I think what's really exciting for everyone is that there's a real motivation for people to fight and for people to improve things, and we're seeing that we've got members pouring in all the time.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Sean and Vicky. I don't think, as far as I can see, we've got the speaker from Positive Action in Housing. If you are from Positive Action in Housing, please say no. Okay, well, I think we should maybe continue and hear from Ellis, from the student from Rent Justice Edinburgh, and then open it up to discussion. Okay, so Ellis, where are you?
Yeah, I'm here. Hello.
Okay, on you go.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for having me here. So back in September, a lot of students were like very angry with how the university was treating us in halls, and also how they've been running the courses this year. So you may have seen some of the news articles about like what's happening at Pollock, but a lot of these problems have exist in the other accommodation owned by the university as well. So like it kind of registered as Eddie kind of began around when me and my flatmate began sending this form to like all the group chats we were in, kind of trying to get an idea of like, you know, what students were thinking and just like let them vent out sort of the problems they were having. So some of the issues that were raised were, so people were receiving like really inadequate food packages when they were isolating, especially if they had dietary requirements. And in some cases, it would take over a week for students to receive any food, like after loads and loads of emails without a response. So people have had really poor access to resources for their learning and equipment and services that would usually be provided for free. So students in isolation have had no means to wash their clothes for 2 weeks in a lot of cases. Some courses have been completely asynchronous, and there's just been really poor Wi-Fi in halls, and we've had to put up with very temperamental learning platforms online. And there's also just a very general dissatisfaction with the quality of the accommodation compared to the incredibly high rent we have to pay. So yeah, we've kind of found a bunch of other students who were doing a sort of similar thing at the same time, beginning to organise for a rent strike, and we kind of joined forces under the name Rent Justice Edinburgh. So we're all students in university-owned halls, and we believe that the uni has misguided students into believing that moving out would be an essential part of their learning experience. But we now kind of recognise that their main motive for this was to continue to profit off student rent, you know, even during this pandemic, which would mean putting like our mental and physical health at risk. So we've got 3 key demands which we're putting forward. So half rent for as long as this quote unquote hybrid learning model operates. And 2, that the functionality of online learning is improved and students are granted free upgrades to superior Wi-Fi, as that is like an essential part of our learning experience right now. And lastly, that any students participating in reasonable action against the university will not face any legal or academic repercussions. So we propose these to Peter Matheson, principal, with the threat that like if these demands aren't met soon, then we will begin to call a rent strike. So unsurprisingly, his response was rather pathetic. It stated that he would not reduce our rent by any means, along with like a lot of poor excuses, especially considering his grossly inflated salary. And he just pushed the blame on teaching staff a lot, and like just made a lot of comments kind of aimed to divide us. He also mentioned in-person teaching a lot, which was something we had not asked for, as it kind of puts in like vulnerable students and staff at a bigger risk. So we're continuing to campaign and raise momentum for a strike in university-owned halls. We want compensation for how we've been treated this semester and want to see improvements for when we return in January. So we just, really support, appreciate any like support and advice we can get, especially since we're all kind of very new to this. Most of us are first years. yeah, we've got like social media at rentjusticeeddie, and you can email us at rentjusticeeddie@gmail.com. So yeah, thank you very much, and I'll do my best with any questions you may have.
Thanks very much, Ellis. Can you put that contact on the chat?
Yeah, sure, I'll do that now.
People can save it. That's great. Thank you. Right. Well, let's open it up. If you would like to talk, contribute or ask a question, please just put your hand up. And I have Ian Mullen first, please. Could I ask people to say when they're speaking, just say who they are and where they're from, a union or group or whatever? Ian.
Thanks, Laurie. My name is Ian Mullen. I'm currently seconded to Unison City Edinburgh branch. I have been for 4 years, but I've actually worked for the council in 6 different departments, and I'm currently a private rented services officer, enforcement officer. I've seen one of the comments in the chat about how many Airbnbs we actually have in Edinburgh at this time. Prior to my secondment, what I can say is that was running into the thousands, it wasn't hundreds. The other thing that and at that stage, it was given us the most, they were the most problematic premises that we had for antisocial behaviour. Where just prior to going on my secondment, we were actually given additional work by the council, and that was to identify empty homes. Now, these can be homes that were either council or that had been maybe handed over as, you know, somebody's deceased and it's been handed down to relatives and they've not been able to afford to actually bring that accommodation, or they haven't wanted to bring it up or rent it out, and it's just lay there. And I think one of the things that the council could do is a compulsory purchase order on these houses. 300 houses lying absolutely idle is an absolute disgrace. And everything that Duncan said, I work with Duncan very closely, and we're actually on a housing committee in Unison, and all the stats that Duncan has said are absolutely correct. The rough sleepers are probably, you know, it's a scandal if you think that they've managed to accommodate them this year, but what's going to happen once we get back to some kind of normality? I've asked that question to senior management within the council, and not one of them have got a strategy or a contingency plan to actually support that. It's the same if you look at refugees and asylum seekers. In my job, if you move into a flat that's got 3 bedrooms or more, an HMO, you have to meet regular standards. If you move into a flat that's 1 or 2 bedrooms, you don't have to do absolutely anything yet, including fire safety. And I've actually been in a few flats that have had 2 bedrooms, but the landlords have actually converted the living rooms into a bedroom, and they'll charge £120 for the living room a week, and there'll be something like £80 or £90 depending on the size of the bedroom per individual. And a lot of them are in the more deprived areas of Edinburgh. And one of the speakers was saying earlier about the purchasing of multiple properties. There really has to be a better tax plan with these individuals, because, for instance, the best example that I have was about 2 or 3 years ago. There is a landlord in Edinburgh who has multiple flats, accommodation. He's also got hostels, and we paid him in the region of £6 million for accommodating individuals. If you look at, you know, I had dealings with this individual, and he's a horrible person, and it makes me actually quite sick that people are becoming very rich on the backs of the poor and the vulnerable. Thanks, Ollie.
Thanks very much, Ian. That's good. Right, I have next Donny and then Des.
Thanks, Hilary. Yeah, it's just a question, really. I mean, clearly this appalling situation, whether it's in the university driven by the profit motive or it's in the private sector driven by the profit motive, where's the political currents that are actually standing up and saying we're going to stand by the ordinary people, we're going to stand by the homeless, we're going to stand by people who don't have property rather than people who do happen to have property? Is there any? I mean, I can see there's a councillor here. I don't know from which party she's in, but I'm just wondering what's the political framework in which we're discussing this, because it's really shocking. And I haven't heard from any of the parties, as far as I know, a serious programme. I'm talking about the ones in Parliament to address it. So it's just a question, really. I don't know what people think about that.
I'm Councillor Mandy Watt. I'm a Labour councillor. I'm the vice convener of Housing, Homelessness and Fair Work at the City of Edinburgh Council. And I came along to listen. If you know, the chair and people want me to try my best to answer questions, I'm happy to do that, but I don't want this to be about me, if you see what I mean. I want it to be...
Apologies, Mandy. I didn't mean you as a person. I was asking about the political party. So yeah, apologies.
Yeah. No, that even at that, like, I don't want to, like, because I'm a councillor, I don't want to feel like I'm taking over the meeting. One thing that I did want to say was a really big shout out to the way that council housing officers and community groups have responded during COVID-19 and are trying to work through what comes after. I cannot speak highly enough of what they've done. It's been extraordinary. Regarding the politics of it, so short-term lets, we have fought such a battle on that, because 10% of private properties available for let, 10% in Edinburgh that we know about are short-term lets. That is a huge number of homes that are not available to people that need a home. There's currently legislation going through the Scottish Parliament, and we had to fight tooth and nail for that. And right up to the absolute last gasp, Fiona Hislop was saying we're not having it. It's more important to have a tourist industry, and we were just like, absolutely not, and fought, and we're getting the legislation, and it'll be based around planning and licensing. And what the will of the City of Edinburgh Council, all parties right across, even members of the Tory party, astonishingly, are on board with making the whole of Edinburgh a control zone for short-term lets, and the default would be that we would refuse them. So that's around that. Rather than just going over sort of old ground, Edinburgh has the most demand for housing. Now, there's something here around the fact that the Scottish Government have failed to address the economic inequalities right across Scotland. So you are having people, it's internal to Scotland, migration between local authorities, because there's not a fair chance of a job. Edinburgh had very low unemployment pre-COVID. It was down about 2-3%. And that was attracting people in from other places in Scotland primarily, where housing is available, to Edinburgh, where housing is not available. And so there's a whole Scotland-wide thing about why they are letting that happen, why they're not taking more steps to balance the economy across the country. So that's a big picture thing. Here in Edinburgh, you know, we are doing everything that we can to bring on these homes, but there's not enough of them. The demand is huge. We're looking at, you know, that I've put up several motions, which COVID kind of pushed them out, for the council to start purchasing suitable properties to use as temporary housing, because the situation where we are paying millions of pounds out for, you know, shared accommodation, like the accommodation that Ian Mullen spoke about, that needs to change, and change is on its way for that. It is, you know, it's a huge push. It's me practically speaking to people every week about it and saying, this has to happen, this has to change, and it is getting put in place. Some of it I would like to talk more about it, but it's because it's around procurement, it's sort of confidential, and I'm not allowed to, you know, put it in the public domain, unfortunately. But come next year, there's going to be changes in how that whole framework works, and in the emphasis on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mandy. Thanks very much for coming.
Yeah.
There's a couple of other people want to come in, and
Absolutely.
I'd really like to ask the people from Living Rent before, if they need to go early, what they think, how they think we might be able to help. But you do come back later in the discussion. But can I ask Des and Willie both have their hands up? Des, please.
What I want to do is, Des Lockham, Secretary of Edinburgh Trading and Council, had a question to ask, and that is, you know, I read a few years ago that Shelter estimated there was 1 million houses in the UK which were empty, not because the transition of one sort or another, because they're simply investment vehicles. If you spend like £100,000 on a newly built house and leave it empty for 5 years, you can then sell it for £150,000. That's a really good investment. And if you do the figures, it means that there are thousands of houses in Edinburgh that are been empty since they were built, and they're deliberately kept empty as an investment vehicle. But you don't see any politicians talking about this, about, well, people have a legal right to do it and they're allowed to do it. But it seems to me to be really antisocial that our society and the council tolerate houses being kept empty as an investment vehicle, when, as Mandy says, there's such a demand for housing. So, but I don't really know what the true picture is in Edinburgh, and council never highlights it as an issue. But if people can tell me, I'd be interested if people can tell me how many empty houses there are in Edinburgh which are deliberately kept empty as an investment vehicle.
Yeah, I think that would be an important question to be answered, because we know from the Willie Black, another Edinburgh is possible, and for North Edinburgh. Just to say that there is probably something in the region of 9,000 Airbnbs. There is more Airbnbs in Edinburgh than there is in London. And that has sucked the life out of private renting accommodation. But more than that, it's become a business. The old hippie idea of getting up a room so that somebody with a backpack can come and stay in your spare room has now a big business. It's a company. It's got a business ethic towards it. People who run those businesses are looking for places to run, and because the regulations are not enforced, they basically have spread out to areas like in North Edinburgh. I know, because I've got a path to Central just across the back green for me. So people are buying blocks of housing that's coming on the market. They're buying them for investment to run them as Airbnb. Now, COVID's destroyed some of that economics at the present moment because tourists and because of the restrictions, and hopefully that will have an impact. And those people that thought they were on a good thing will find that they're not so much on a good thing. But nevertheless, I think that we should be supporting each other's action. I mean, the action that's going to happen on Thursday down here by Live and Rent to have a chalk-in with slogans on the floor and on walls, and then a small march through to the North Office to put in a message of what the demands are in the area should be supported. And I think that we should be supporting each other across the board. So things like Live and Rent, like the student campaign, we should see that as an automatic supporting mechanism, and anything else that happened. I mean, the fact that the campaign that we ran up to the lockdown round the homeless situation, highlighting having pickets outside some of those people that Ewan was talking about, that that were making £5 million out of horrible bed and breakfast. We raised that. We occupied the full council. They had to cancel the council meeting, the full council meeting, because we were singing songs in the corridor. We're stamping our feet. We took over the public galleries. The great thing about it is when the councillors were trying to come out, the mums that were there locked the wheels of their prams so that nobody could get out of the full council room. And they finally had to meet with the campaigners in the European room. But more than that, they were forced into having a housing czar, creating a housing czar and a working party. And the Poverty Commission, also people down here from Lift have made a contribution to that, to say it's poverty that's at the root of the problems that Duncan was talking about, the kind of rent prices. So I think that what we're looking for is a higher percentage of all new builds to be council housing. I hate the word social housing. It should be council housing. That's what we should call it, because there's 4,000 houses in North Edinburgh coming about with $1 billion and a bit money along the waterfront. How many of those houses are going to be council housing? Because I'll tell you what's happening is that where they used to build housing, council housing, there used to be 60,000. They're now down to about 19,000. So that is the shortfall or capacity for doing it. And there's a load of different ideas about purchasing houses when they come on the market, using that. But I do think that what we should be doing is having a campaign to change the percentage of council housing that's in the mix. They love the idea that council house need to have somebody that's bought their premises or rent it as mid-rent to teach us how to live, to teach us how to wash our stairs and keep our children clean and whatever. That idea, the Victorian idea, is somehow crept in. And I've heard it for Labour councillors as well. We didn't want to build ghettos, Willie. Well, I lived in the ghetto. I still live in a ghetto, and I love the ghetto because there's more community every square inch in Muirhouse and Pilton than there is in Barrington or Balerno. So let us fight for our class and the housing that we require, and that will take part of another Edinburgh as possible is looking beyond just fighting the cuts. We'll fight the cuts. We'll fight the trend, but we're needing something beyond that, a vision that people can buy into, that can support each other, and if it's necessary, join in socially safe demonstrations till the such times as we can march freely through the streets of Edinburgh again But we need to build now beyond just, you know, over the next few years, we need to win the argument about another Edinburgh as possible and what that vision looks like. And if it's including Living Rent's manifesto, then that's what we should include. We should be fighting for that manifesto as part of our fight, not just Living Rent's fight. Because if you're not a tenant, you can be a supporter. But we don't want to take anything away from that kind of campaigning. But we all should be Jock Tamson's barons, and we should all fight together.
Okay, thanks, Willie. Vicky, I just want to ask you if you want to raise anything, because I know you have to leave soon. If there's anything you think the Trade Union Council or union branches in particular can do, if you know, or if there's any other points that have come up that you'd like to raise before you go.
Yeah, sure. I'm not really so familiar with like your like the function of this group or role, but obviously you know, we're not qualified housing advisors and we're not lawyers, and we're definitely, so if people have any like skills or like knowledge that they can share, we're always looking to put on more training and to have people along to help out at that. And I kind of wanted to mention actually on the holiday lets thing as well, because I know like I've got a case just now with a kind of notorious landlord in Edinburgh who's actually been banned from letting, but what he's doing is using holiday contracts and targeting like people newly arrived in the country and getting them signed up on a holiday let contract, which basically has like no protections at all, and then just evicting them like at the drop of a hat. So that's going on like amongst that amongst the Airbnb scandal as well, and I kind of expect that to become as like Airbnbs and as like the tourism industry is going like Mark Fortune what a bastard as the tourism industry's kind of dropping a bit in Edinburgh. So wanted to mention that, and then also about just the like points on like this the terminology that we use to refer to council houses and like the concept of affordable housing not actually being necessarily council housing that's open to everybody, and it just being majority mid-market rents, unfortunately. That's all I kind of wanted to add in, but I really appreciate everything that Willie said as well, and obviously that support, because we definitely need it. It's like, definitely all in this together, and need as much like even just your time. I think even like if you can spare any time to come along to meetings or to come along to actions, then it'd be great.
Okay, thanks. Can you say just a bit more about, Willie mentioned a demonstration that you were doing?
Sean maybe knows a wee bit more information about that if he's still here.
Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll pop a link to the event in the chat. But basically, we've got a protest planned on Thursday afternoon. It's the first action from our newly formed Muirhouse branch, and we are demanding improvements in housing in Muirhouse from Edinburgh City Council. So I'll pop the event in the chat, and any support anyone can bring is fantastic, even if that's just sharing the event, letting anyone know who you think might be interested in the event. It would be amazing if you could do that.
And union branches and the Trade Union Council can affiliate to Living Rent, right? Yeah. Okay, thanks. Carmen, you've had your hand up waiting patiently, thanks.
Hi, I'm Carmen, and I'm a Unite member. I have a question about something that Duncan said before. He said something about the need of housing and the numbers in terms of how much housing is needed, but then how much housing the council is planning to build up. And I think it's a huge gap in there. And I was just wondering whether I got that right. And the other kind of question that I have is, my understanding is that the council give permission to build up new buildings for housing, but who is responsible to then create the services that are going to be needed in that area? For example, in the area near Portobello, currently there is lots and lots of housing being built up at the moment, but I cannot see any planning to create more schools or more GP surgeries. So for me, it's like, okay, we are allowing these building companies to make money building houses, but I cannot see who is going to be responsible to provide these services. You know, I can see the buildings going up, but I cannot see more schools or more GPs or more libraries. So that's my question.
Okay, thanks, Carmen. I know Ian has his hand up. Can I just check if there's anyone else who hasn't yet spoken who would like to come in? Joyce, on you go. You're muted, Joyce. Joyce, you're muted.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Hello, yes, I can hear you now, right.
Thank you. My apologies. I clicked on Sean's link and that interrupted the Zoom page. Apologies about that. Yeah, basically, we are
Joyce, you're freezing.
Seems to have lost her connection altogether, I think. Yeah.
Sophie, can you go ahead while we're waiting?
Yeah, I have a kind of like, maybe it's a strange question. I don't know, this is like, I think we all need to think about it, living rent and everyone else. I'm just thinking about the students in general as a sort of like source of money for the city in terms of the rent. You know, like sort of students turn up here to study and they have to face, on the one hand, the university trying to make them, you know, sign, I'm sure Sean knows, you know, the things, they make them sign 12 months contracts of things that they have not even seen, you know, these rooms, and they find that their rooms are next to building sites. You know, I had students having nervous breakdowns because they were trapped in a place where they were like building works 24/7 and they couldn't study, they couldn't sleep. But then you have the private landlords doing all these weird things with the festival. You get like, you come out in August because I want to rent it and all of this. So I'm just wondering if there's something that we can do in this thinking of kind of thinking together, all these ideas that we have. Sometimes we talk with Willie about all these plans of kind of getting organized to solve these problems, how we can take care of the students really, because they are very vulnerable in this setup. So that was my question.
Okay, thank you. Joyce, we lost you completely. Are you on now?
Yeah, I am. My apologies, everybody. It was my computer still trying to connect to Sean's page and just cut me off. Can you hear me, Hilary?
Yeah. Yes, on you go.
Great. Okay. Basically, also picking up on Sophia's point there, I think, and also, you know, what's also been said by various other people, we absolutely have to take action. I thank Mandy very much indeed for the huge work she's doing, and I know the work that Pauline O'Neill's doing at Holyrood, trying to, you know, get to grips with what's going on. In terms of the students, I think potentially you've got a framework there for taking a collective action. And the Scottish Human Rights Commission, it recognises economic social rights, and dignity is the first aspect of it. So that thing about not even being able to close, you know, wash your clothes and look after your health that way, the facilitation and circumvention of them entrapping people into the premises, etc., etc., the unfair contracts, I reckon they all come together. And it, unlike the English Human Rights Commission, the Scottish Human Rights Commission can actually take a case, and it could take a case for judicial review. And I think that might be worth having a look at. Also, Shelter started to do some work with the NUS about 2 years ago or something, and that's unfinished business. So I think they're snowed under just now, otherwise they would have joined us tonight. But I think they can actually get them to draw up a document of what are our student rights, because as Ellie pointed out, you know, many people are hitting this for the first time in their lives and they don't know where they stand, and whatever they experience is simply normal. I've also put up various comments during this evening there, and you might find some of them helpful. But basically it comes down to, are we going to regard property as people's homes, yes or no? And we need to get that anchored in law so that the councils and the governments all come together around that, and then you'll start to see other policies shaping around it. This is a basic human right of dignity, and they don't have a loophole of excusing it by COVID, Brexit, or whatever the next thing is. And if you have it anchored there, it gives weight to the councils to be able to demand more resources and to get, you know, a better sort of framework sitting there. I think we're heading for a nightmare with the current model. We've got unaffordable rents, we've got incomes reducing, people being made unemployed like with Intercontinental, and then to sign up with 0-hour contracts instead. What are we going to do when people reach retirement age? They're not going to have anything to sustain themselves. You know, it's totally unsustainable, the whole model. And this is the time to rethink. So I would say, you know, how can we put our hats on and put in petitions to Parliament and put in legal frameworks, bits of legislation that needs shifted, so that we address it at its roots and get a healthier situation moving forward.
Okay, thanks, Joyce. Right, I know Ian wants to talk. Willie, have you got your hand up again, or have you just not put it down? Or you've got it up? Do you want to come in again, Willie? Not now, but no, okay, thanks. And I know that Carmen's questions, I think, are not answered. So I'd like to bring Duncan in to do that. But first of all, before Ian, can I ask a question? And I think maybe Mandy might be able to answer it. What's happening to the homeless people who were housed in hotels during the pandemic? Maybe they still are, maybe they're out on the streets, I don't know. But perhaps you could answer that. But first, Ian. Ian, on you go.
Sorry, Hilary, you caught me out there. Yeah, going back to what I was saying about the empty homes in Edinburgh, we have a green strategy. We're doing a lot of work around looking at transport, looking at developing cycleways and walkways. We also have a strategy for 2050. What we don't have is a strategy about building homes that are actually affordable, that are. I was brought up at a time when the vast majority of housing in Edinburgh was all council owned, and that created employment. And I think that what we need to do, we're going in the wrong direction. We're allowing private developers to buy up green space and build these very expensive homes. We've now got it written into legislation that at least 10 to 15% of these homes have to be social housing. And I hate that word as well. But I think with the strategies that we have in place, what we should be looking at is long-term investment in council homes that can be, that we would be accountable for the standard and the actual cost of the rents. So, you know, and we also have to take this at the same time as getting the empty homes that are in Edinburgh back into the market again. If we continue to build at the rate that we are going right now, our kids and our grandkids aren't going to have the green space that they deserve to grow up and to run a bit in that we had as children. And that's one of the things that I've got a real issue with at the moment. The amount of green land that we are building on, green belt land, is unsustainable, and it's all private investment. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ian. And Sean has to head off now, so thanks very much, Sean, for coming, and keep in touch. Could I ask, I think Carmen's question, Duncan, can you answer, Carmen?
Yeah, hello.
Yeah.
The projections for the demand for housing are, you know, into the 40,000s in coming years. The intention of the council with housing associations is to build approximately 1,000 dwellings each year, so that's 2,000 a year. I don't know where they are with that, but you know, it's going to take an awful long time actually to get sufficient people housed. So while that program is much better than nothing, and if you like, much better than the Thatcher years where there was no public housing being built at all, it's a step forward from that. But really, I think you're right, Carmen, that it's you know, desperately not enough. And you know, bring in what other people have said, we need housing to be more firmly in the programs of the Labour Party and the Greens and so forth, really, because it is such a serious issue. As people have said, you know, it's not just a roof over your head. Having a home is much more significant. If you don't have a home, it affects all sorts of things like educational attainment, your physical health, your mental well-being. All these sorts of things are really important to being a human being. And it's, you know, it's a human right. And you know, in the 21st century, we shouldn't have people wondering whether they can actually maintain a room over their, you know, roof over their head, or be able to afford the rent versus food, as we have in some situations. Yeah, again with Carmen, I agree that when you look at the housing estates which have grown up recently, I've been looking at ones in southeast Edinburgh recently on the fringe, what was the fringes of the city before. I can't see any new public facilities being built around these, as you say, schools and so forth, just lots and lots of houses. And I guess the reason for that is that's where the money is. I could be wrong, that there could be the, you know, proper public facilities planned at a later date, but I just see tons of houses, and that's not enough. I agree with you. Where is the infrastructure that's going to support people living as human beings in these houses? I could come back on more stuff. Do you want me to leave it there, Hilary, just now?
Yes, I think so. We've only got another 15 minutes.
Okay.
So, there's other people wanting to talk, and I'd like to bring Ellis back in again before we finish. Right, Willie, you had your hand up? You didn't?
What Mandy, what was saying, the councillor, about the control zone for the whole of Edinburgh, I think that we should be examining that and finding that, because we wanted rent control. The type of things that was happening in Barcelona to control Airbnb should be looked at. The way that Germany controls whole cities, it's no an unusual thing. It's no particularly socialist, but it is something. I mean, you know, even the Tories can support it. But what we need today is to make it happen so that we can control that. But the other thing that happened was when we were doing the housing campaign, we went out and identified empty houses, and we found about 15 in the streets of North Edinburgh, and we put them into the council. What happened is some of them were brought back into use because, you know, there's wee practical things that we can do as campaigners in our areas to make a difference, but we can't build the houses. But the houses have got to be fit for purpose. They can't just be cardboard boxes. They have to have new standards. The regulations at the moment are terrible. We need to have that. The other thing that we need to do is to demand that all houses are refitted to fit with climate the requirements. So they have to be insulated. They have to have proper. That would employ thousands and thousands of people across the country, so that people could get reasonable jobs at reasonable wages. So there is practical things, and I think that the campaign down here in North Edinburgh is looking. We've created wee groups to have a look at all those questions and to come up with some of the answers. But we want to share that, and we also want another Edinburgh as possible to come up with a vision which is helped and supported by Live and Rent, Shelter, and other organised trade unions to make a difference. Because we definitely need to go into the election with something to say to their councillors, but also more than that, to have a vision for a different kind of world that people can be inspired by and want to be fighters and activists.
Thanks, Willie. Can I suggest that anyone whose email we haven't got already, because there's a few new people here, could put their email on the chat, and we can keep in touch about future campaigns on this issue. Okay, right. Anybody else? Could I perhaps ask Alice to come in? We've got 10 more minutes, but Alice, is there anything you'd like to add, or anything you think trade union branches or this campaign can do to help the rent justice? Is Alice there still?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I mean, it's been really interesting listening to you lot and hearing about the wider issues in Edinburgh. But yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what to say about what kind of help we can ask from you guys, but just sort of generally, you know, getting the word out, and if you can like show your support in any way, that would be great. But like, yeah, if you want to kind of message me about it again, my email is in the chat, but yeah, sorry, I can't really give you anything kind of specific, but
that's great. Thanks, Alice, and thanks very much for coming.
May I raise one more point, Hilary?
Yes, briefly, please.
Thank you. Another thing to be looked at is the capacity and the working conditions of the construction industry, particularly for Edinburgh, that basically, you know, the council shed loads of their workers things, and on the private sector, a lot of companies shed their workers, and they came on as so-called self-employed running through, I think it's 2 recruiting agencies in Edinburgh, and all the prices are stitched up. And the guys are getting something like £15 an hour, which by the time they pay for the administration costs of that agency, because it's viewed as a service supply to them, it's the wrong way round, they're coming out with about £11 an hour. And their working conditions are absolutely diabolic. And Paul Kroll, who's often in on this group, he's very informed about all of these things, and I strongly recommend that you speak with them. Also, he has been extremely concerned about the quality of the social housing that's been put up, such as all the new stuff at Wester Hales and things, that some of the construction is so, has been so dire that, for example, he's had to point out, do you realise the staircase you're building will not even finish up on the floor it's supposed to take people to, but leave them stranded about 1.5 meters short, okay? And so the whole thing has to be rebuilt. The quality is very, very poor indeed. And we've also got new housing that's going in that you'll be lucky if it's truly got the lifespan of a mortgage of 25 years. So we're building ourselves more problems. We've also lost a huge swathe of competent, experienced, very well trained people from Europe, such as the Poles. Okay, that's been lost in Scotland, and we need to be tying in with our colleges and our schools and getting the kids engaged. One of my daughters is a technical teacher. She does woodwork and stuff. She'd worked in Australia, and the kids there were taught to take things like a whole slice of a tree and work with it, understand it, how it performs, and how to do engineering and problem solving. Here, because of budgets, they're being given pre-cut bits of wood, sort of like 2x4, and basically tested on their ability.
Okay, it looks like we've lost Joyce again. Des, why don't you come in?
I just wanted to say that my own union branch is meeting tomorrow night, and we're considering a motion of affiliating to living rents. And how much you pay to affiliate depends on the size of your branch. The size of our branch means that affiliation fee is £150, but me and our branch can afford to pay that. And that's one way of supporting campaigns like that. The other way is, of course, that my branch, we now have an email list of all our members, which is over 1,000. And so an organisation like Living Rent says, well, could you circulate all your members with information about what we're doing and who to contact if people are interested? Well, to email 1,000+ members doesn't take very long. I mean, it's only half an hour, 3/4 of an hour to do that particular job. And I think my branch will think that's an appropriate way to support such an organisation as Living Rent. And I think because it's proportional to membership, I think most union branches in the city could support Living Rent that way if they wished.
Thanks, Des. Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, Joyce, you were cut off, but could I? Yeah. Sorry, could I cut you off again? Because we only have 5 minutes, and I really want to ask anyone else who hasn't.
May I give half a sentence, and that is, what can we do to tie in the youth coming out of the schools who are going to be unemployed into the training of the trades that we so desperately need?
Yes, I think that's a question that's come up before, and a very good question. Anyone else, this is your last chance, we have 5 minutes. Anyone else like to come in? And could I ask anyone, Mandy, can anyone answer my question about what's happened to the homeless?
I can, and I'm sure that Duncan will chip in. So some of them are still in, you know, hotel type accommodation. We tried to get mainly the ones that are not just rooms, but the ones that are like sort of studio apartments and apartment hotels, so that the accommodation's decent. For people who were rough sleeping, we're actually taking over most of the old Waverley Hotel. That's come to an end, but what we now have is the one at Haymarket. So we're replacing that, and we're working with Bethany Trust, and that's so that we can provide accommodation to people potentially who have no recourse to public funds, and that sort of thing. So we are, you know, everybody in the homelessness team and in the councils working really, really hard on that, and we will make sure that there's provision and that they do not end up out on the streets in the winter during COVID. It's a public health issue. We're not going to allow that to happen. Our budget is predicted to be a 10 million overspend. That's not a total of 10 million. It's, you know, about 30 or 40 million that we spend on temporary accommodation, and that's above and beyond what we can claim back in, you know, the rent allowance. It is a huge amount of money. We're going to be 10 million over budget to provide for homelessness in the coming year. We're 10 million over this year already. The Scottish Government are doing absolutely nothing to help us with that. It's really, you know, it's a public health emergency, and they're just outsourcing the cost of it, if I can use that expression, outsourcing it onto councils. They're just asset stripping councils. They're taking away all our reserves and refusing to implement any of the potential alternatives, like being able to borrow for, you know, revenue. Being able to spread your budget over, you know, 3 years. They're insisting that it's balanced this year. It's really quite shocking, but I will certainly, along with everybody else on the team, be doing everything we can to make sure that homeless people don't suffer because of that. Maybe on a sort of seems less important and less dramatic, but I can answer a few of the other questions as well. Des's point about empty investment homes. I've asked for, and I'll ask again, a report on, you pay different council tax if a home's empty, and I'm looking for a report on how many people or how many homes are paying that empty home council tax, and particularly anywhere they've been paying it for more than a year, because I would like to be able to, you know, answer Des on that. Carmen's question about infrastructure. When a development gets through planning, there is what's called a developer's contribution that's supposed to go towards infrastructure. It is nowhere near enough. There's also the Scottish Government are supposed to fund infrastructure like schools. It's nowhere near enough. And it's, you know, you really, it is such an uphill struggle to fund things that are needed. If I can come to Ian Mullins' point about the green belt versus the need to build, you know, 30 or 40,000 homes versus there being no space left in the city that isn't built on. And that just goes to sort of my kind of my opening remarks, where the Scottish Government is not taking cognizance of that internal migration from the west to the east. It's clearly documented. There's council homes sitting empty all over the west coast, and people in Edinburgh with no homes to live in, but they can't live you know, where there's homes, because there's no jobs for them. And it's really balancing all that. They've had, you know, 13 years, and some of them were pretty good years money wise, and they just didn't focus on the right things. They blew up the tourism bubble to, you know, that was a huge thing that they put in loads of effort and investment to, and nothing, absolutely nothing for the hundreds of thousands of working people that do not want to spend their life saying, would Sir like fries with that? So a bit of event there, but back to say that, you know, I would welcome any feedback, any questions from anybody who's been on this meeting and feels that they didn't get an answer, or that you know, that I didn't address something that I should have. I'm mandy.watt@edinburgh.gov.uk, and you know, thank you for all the contributions, because as I say, I came on to listen rather than talk, and it's been fantastic to hear you know, everybody trying to support each other and help each other through this, which is a huge challenge, a huge crisis for all of us, and so thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mandy. Right, if there's nobody else who's dying to say something, I'm going to close the meeting. And I hope we can keep these initiatives going, keep in touch. And this is such a huge subject. I think we could probably organise another meeting in this series in the future. I'm really sorry. I did have a promise from Positive Action in Housing that someone, Sunny Singh, would come. But I know that they're often, you know, they have to deal with frantic last minute emergencies. So, but I hope next time we can deal with the question of how the crisis is affecting refugees. But thank you all very much for coming. Thank you. That was great. Cheers.
Thanks, Ollie.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.